Welcome back to another episode. So in this one there's no intro, none of that stuff. Let's get straight into it. So previously I said I don't want to make masters, but the more I add things, the more I realize that I need to come back and make some micro adjustments throughout all the buildables, and it's a lot of time. Now I'm not gonna have one master for all the buildables, but I'm going to have one master for all of these. The windows are gonna stay separate. Now why is that? So let's open up two of these, like doesn't matter which ones. The biggest difference is that the build window is using two additional static mesh components that we need to rotate and we need to interact with those. Now this one doesn't have them. So I'm going to leave that one separate. Technically, we can still, of course, make them all in the same master, but there are some slight changes that will simply just make your life a lot easier later on. If we just keep this a little bit separate, you can create a master, an additional master just for the windows, because you might have multiple different types of windows. So you can create masters, just one master for all of your other windows. So then you will have only two places where you need to come back and make these adjustments. So I'm going to have basically the same thing. I'm going to have the build master, which is going to control all the other buildables that I have at this moment, and then I will have to come back to the build window and make the adjustments for that one as well. So I'm going to have only two adjustments instead of, in this case, well, we have six. At least I have six. So with that being said, let's go ahead, let's create our master. So what I'm going to do is grab the build foundation because it has the majority of the functionality that we will need. So I'm just going to control W, and I'm going to call this build master. There we go. So we have the build master. Now we need to clean this up a little bit. We gotta remove a lot of things because obviously the things that we have in here, all the other buildables are gonna inherit, so all of them will have exactly the same things. Now the first and the most important part is these extra components that we have. We don't need all of these components in all the other buildables. Every single one of them will have their unique components. So just go ahead and delete all of those from the build master. Good. So the next thing, let's clean up some more. In the master, we don't need these two functions. These are going to be unique just for that one buildable. So let's go ahead, let's delete those as well. Obviously it gives us an error because it requires this one right here. So go ahead and delete that because we no longer will use that over there. Now the next part is in the build master, where we have the interact with the build. We are finishing the build, we are resetting its materials back, and we're doing the same thing for the extensions. Now this is a build master. It will not have any extensions. The only one that is going to have these extensions is the foundation. So you can go ahead and delete this part as well. There we go. So that's gone. Let's see what else we need. Probably we can get rid of some additional variables, like we don't need the foundation materials and the extensions, so we can delete those two variables. Everything else, from what I see, is probably going to be needed. So that's good enough for now. So once we have done this, let's go ahead and let's start applying this master to our other buildables. So the first one, let's start off with the foundation. So we have the foundation over here. So what I want to do is actually go ahead and delete majority of the code. So I will not need this set build cost. It's going to get set from the master. Then I'm going to leave this part of code that we just deleted from the master, but I'm going to delete everything before it. So I'm going to delete all of this stuff, and I'm going to leave the extensions loop. It's going to just be hanging in there. We're not going to do anything with it as of right now, but we are going to put this into use in a second. Now the next thing is the begin play. Again, let's delete everything, but let's leave the calculate distance from ground, because that is that, like I said, that's that unique function for this specific buildable. Good. The next thing is we need to remove all of the variables that we already have in the master. So the materials, cost is finished, resources placed, and build ID. So materials, delete, cost, delete, finished, delete. It's already in use. Okay, so let's just wait for that. Let's delete the resources and the ID, which is also in use. So let's just right click those and let's find the reference. So we have this. So it is the return build ID. Okay, so keep that in mind. We're going to need to return that. So now we can delete that. Right click is build finished. And we have a function is build finished, which is the interface one. So again, I'm just going to delete that so I can get rid of that variable. There we go. So everything seems to be clear. Everything seems to be emptied up. Now we're gonna miss a couple of things. We're gonna lose a couple of things. So we have the return boxes. So just to save your time, go ahead, copy these nodes and copy these into the event graph. So this is going to be like our placeholder for now. We're going to store the things that we are still going to need in a second. So now we can go back to the return boxes and delete it from there. We just want to make sure everything is clear, so it's going to be a little bit easier when it comes to adding these interface messages and all that stuff over here. So seems like everything else stays the way it is. We have the foundation materials, which are separate individually for this one. Arrows are individually for this one. Everything else seems to be the way it needs to be. So what I'm going to do is not to mess this system's brain up too much. I'm going to go to the class settings, and first I'm going to remove the build interface. Otherwise, we're going to have like a double of them, and it's going to be a little bit of an issue. So let's delete that. This way it will not overwrite any unnecessary things, but it does leave us with 3 of these functions which we don't need. The return build ID, delete, is build finish delete, and return boxes delete. Now recompile and save this, and we have like a blank actor. Good. Let's go back to the class settings, and now let's apply this build master. So in the details panel in the parent class, we can now look for our build master. And once we do that, instantly you will see that it comes up with all these interface functions back. Now, if we would have left those there, it would probably create like duplicates for us, and it might cause some tiny little issues. It might be a little awkward, but in this situation, it is a lot more cleaner. Actually, I made a tiny mistake, so we actually don't need this. So just feel free to delete this for good. So we are good with this, just with this code. Now, once we have added the master back to it, the issue is, well, we cannot open these functions. As you can see, we can double click them. Nothing really is going to happen. Luckily for us, well, the variables stay the same, information stays the same, so we should be very good with these things just running in the master. So let's go back to the master real quick, just so that we fix this issue so it doesn't come up along the development process. So first, let's go ahead, let's go through all of these. So we have the return build ID, which returns build ID, all good, that's exactly what we want. Is build finished, return boxes, boom, empty array. Okay, so let's fix this. Now, we are using the box collisions, so this makes our life a lot easier. So what we can do is drag from the execution, and we can get components. That's interesting. Oh, maybe it doesn't have the execution. So get components. Yeah, it doesn't have the execution. So just click somewhere and get components by class, multiple ones, multiple components. And we want to look for box components, box component. And then we can plug that into return. So now it is going to go through all of the box components that this actor may have, and it's going to return those, and it's going to be just fine. So we have the build foundation, and now let's give it a small test. Let's see what happens if we would hit play now. We have this, so we can build it. As you can see, there it is. We can finish it, and it still seems to be functioning. Let's see, can we delete this, or so can we move this? We can move this. Let's see. Can we delete this? So we can still delete this, and everything seemed to work just fine. We are not using the build master whenever we do this, because you can test this by going back to your build master, selecting the master component, and let's change its mesh to like a cube. So we have the cube now. There we go. The build master is the cube. Build foundation for some reason also changed into the cube. Oh yeah, because they're all gonna use the same one. So now if we build now, I think it's gonna build us a cube. Yeah, that's right. It's gonna build us a cube. We can still remove it. It's gonna use this one as a preview. It's gonna still snap to it because it uses those things. Yeah, so it's gonna change into a cube. Okay, that's kind of expected, because we're gonna have to make some adjustments because of this one, because this one doesn't use begin play. This one instead uses the set mesh. So now in our build master, you can set this to any mesh you like. It will not matter at all. But for it not to matter, we need to make some tiny adjustments. So we have this thing on begin play, which creates us those transparent materials and allows us to walk through the build and then finish it off, and then it changes it back to its original materials. But our begin play changes those to transparent ones, so we can see through those and all that stuff. But if we would take an example from our build wall, we have no begin play. Instead, we have the set mesh. And then after that, we proceed with this code right here. So what I'm going to do is copy these few nodes. So we have the, or let's just set it up. So in the build master, instead of begin play, I'm going to remove that. And instead, I'm going to run the event set mesh. So that is the interface function which gets called whenever we spawn an object. This is the first thing that gets spawned. Obviously the build begin play is getting ran a little bit quicker, so it's probably going to be like a frame beforehand, but this is the next thing that gets ran essentially. And we can see that if we go to our build component and we have the spawn build. So over here you can see we are spawning the actor, we are spawning our buildable, and then we are running the set mesh event. So in our master then, what we can do is go ahead and do the same thing we did in the wall. We can grab our master component, so the static mesh component, and we can set static mesh. So we can set it static mesh, and the mesh is this one from the input. Exactly the same thing like we did in the wall, like so. And then once we are done with that, we can run whatever code we had in our begin play, like so. There we go. So this is very important that you first set the static mesh and only then grab its materials, because as of right now in the master we have the cube. So it's very important that we change the mesh to whatever we need, and then so that we can grab the new mesh's materials. Otherwise, if you're going to run this previous code before set static mesh, it's just going to grab the cube's material, and it's going to mess the whole thing up when it comes to materials. So now if we would hit play and build a foundation, it is going to place down a foundation just like the way it should. We can move it around and it's going to work just fine. So now, before we proceed with making the same adjustments for all the other ones, let's finish off with the build foundation because it has its own unique twists and turns. So if we go back to the build foundation, I accidentally deleted this one. So we have these unique things that are only living inside of this actor. So we got to make sure that we run those as well. So luckily for us, we can run pretty much all the same things that we have over here. And it is very important that we run this event. So let's go ahead and let's run the event set mesh like so. Now, if we would directly now connect it like so, we're going to have an issue because essentially this event right here is going to be overriding the parents one. So you will see that whenever we place this, boom, we have a cube again. So that's not what we want. So since this overrides it, it ignores the parent one. So what you want to do is just right click this, the event set mesh, and you want to add call to parent function. Now this thing right here is going to run the parent function first, and then it's going to proceed with whatever code that we are providing it. So just make sure you connect the inputs so that it does pass along the mesh to the parent as well. And now it should create us the foundation extensions, and it should set up the build. There we go. So everything seems to be the same way, except for, well, we are really not able to it doesn't change the material. We can still walk through this, and it does not change the extensions like they should be changed to. So again, very similar to just like before. We want to look which is the function that does that. So in this case, it is the event interact with build. So it's this guy right here. So what we want to do is, well, this is going to be a little bit different because again, we want to run this. So we want to look for the event interact with build, and then we want to right click it and we want to do a call to the parent function. So we want to run that first, and then after that, so in our build master, once we are done with it, whenever it is set to be finished, then we are changing its material. Now this part right here is going to stay over here, but now we need to also run this code right here. But unfortunately, if we run it like directly, it is going to still allow us to finish the foundations instantly. So if we place this, interact with it once, you can see, boom, instantly it's the way it should be. But well, it's not exactly how it should be because we want to make sure that we spend all the resources necessary before we change it. So what we need to do is we need to tap into the parents variables to figure out whether this specific build is finished. We have no return from here because this is an event. It will not return us any information, but we can go ahead and add ourselves a if branch check and check if the build is finished. We don't have that variable over here, but since our master class is the build master, so the parent class, not the master class, but the parent class is the build master, we inherit all the functions and all the variables that the master has. So we can just right click anywhere and we can get is build finished, like so. And now we can plug this in. So it's going to run the parent event first. It's going to check whatever it needs to check, and then afterwards it's going to check whether this specific buildable is finished. And then if it is finished, then we can proceed with setting back the materials. So now if we go ahead and build this up, build a couple of these just to test it a little bit better. So 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. There we go, and the collisions are back and everything is the way it should be. So now our foundation is pretty much finished. So let's make the same thing essentially for all the other ones as well. So let's proceed with the wall. Now let's have a look. Again, we need to make sure that we look into this to see what are the differences between these actors and delete everything that is the same. So if we look at the build master, at the main function, we have this part right here which sets the mesh, changes the material. Over here we have the same thing, so we can just go ahead, delete that. Build cost, we have it in there as well, and the interaction event again is exactly the same, so we can just delete that. And also let's go ahead, let's delete the unnecessary variables. In this case it is all of them. So yeah, it's gonna tell us that it needs that. We're gonna still remove that. Cool. Let's go to the class settings. Let's remove the build interface as well. There we go. Let's go ahead, let's delete these functions. We no longer need those. So now essentially this is an empty actor. All it has is 4 collision box components and the static mesh as a parent component, and that's it. So now back in our class settings, we can go ahead and provide the build master. So now compile and save this, and let's try to build something. So let's try to build these walls. So we have 1, 2, and 3. We can go ahead, finish those. Then let's place down a foundation so that we can move this around. So now we interact with this, and we can go ahead and make it work exactly the same way as it worked before, and we don't have to worry about anything. Oh, wrong actor. Looked into the wrong one. There we go. So we are back to normal and our walls are working as well. So now let's speed this whole thing up a little bit. I'm going to close those extra things. I'm going to leave the build master because it's very useful to just compare. Is everything exactly the same, or maybe we need to make some tiny adjustments in the child classes. So let's see. So we have the build wall, all good. Just to make maybe your icons a little bit better, you will notice that some of these will change. So if we go to the floor now, and again, let's do the same thing, quick look. Everything seems to be the same, other than that this is using the begin play, but we are changing that to set mesh. So again, we can delete everything from here. We can delete our build interface. Cool. Delete its extra functions, delete the extra variables. All good. Only leave it with the components. And let's now add our build master. Good. And I believe that's it. So the reason why this one's icon stays the same and the mesh stays the same, I believe it's because this is like the changed one, but this is left with the default one. So you can go back to this one, set its static mesh and change it to foundation. This is more so just for the visual purposes for you alone. It doesn't change the code. Again, you can set meshes to any of these buildables to whatever you want. It's just simply going to be easier for you if you see, oh, this is the icon, this is the buildable, right? So it's a lot easier to then spot which one we need to go into and make the necessary adjustments. So let's finish this off real quick. So the build door, let's go to the event graph. Now this one is going to have a couple of things a little bit different. So we have this unique piece right here. That is this one. So again, I'm going to move it out and I'm gonna delete the rest of it, except for, let's leave this part. Let's leave the is build finished, because we're gonna need that one. So we're gonna delete the bottom piece, like so. We're gonna delete this piece, set cost, and on begin play we have something that is a little bit different, so we're gonna leave that part as well, so that we can get the default door rotation, so that we know where it needs to rotate back to. And again, class settings, remove the interface. Let's delete these functions that it just made because of it, and let's delete the variables that we have in the master. So the materials should be gone, cost is finished. Yeah, let's delete that one. So it removed it from over here, so don't worry about that. Resources placed, build ID. There we go. So it leaves us with 3 variables. Default rotation is open and is opening. There we go. So everything else should be good. Let's again change the build master. Good. Now it gave us an error with the interact. Yeah, don't worry about that. Delete that. We don't need that because we will need to use the master one. Good. So again, just like previously, so on the starting of the game, we need to set the default rotation. So we want to look for the event set mesh, this one. Then we want to right click this and we want to run the parent one first. And once it's been ran, then we can set the default rotation like so. So that's good. Now let's go ahead and run our event interact with build. Again, right click this, add a parent node before we do anything, so that the parent function gets ran, and then we can do an if branch check. And this if branch check basically will go ahead and tap into the master's variables. So it's going to look is build, get is build finished. And then if the build is finished, then well, we can proceed with opening the doors code that we have over here, like so. So like I said, we do need some tiny adjustments. At first I didn't make the masters, not quite sure exactly why, to be honest. Maybe it was a better idea to make the masters directly, because then it would be a little bit kind of a little bit easier. But at the same time, now you need to repeat the things. We go over some of the stuff, and it just basically refreshes your memory about what we did previously, because there's already been quite a lot of episodes in this series, and there's going to be quite a few more. So it's very important that you try to analyze these, that we go over this a little bit more, and you basically understand things a little bit better, hopefully. Now, if you've gone this far in the series, congratulations. It's been quite a road, and you're going to have quite a cool system that's going to be very, very easy to move things around and add even more stuff. Now the last one is the build house. Again, exactly the same thing. This one doesn't have anything unique, so we can just go ahead, delete everything. We can remove the interface, delete its 3 extra functions, delete its 5 variables, like so. And in the class settings, then we can add ourselves the build master, compile and save this, and now we are back with whatever we had before, and this whole thing should work exactly the same way it did before. Now if you have any issues, something got lost throughout the way, something's not good, go ahead, leave a comment down below so we can address those issues, inform others as well, just in case somebody else runs into a similar issue, so that everybody would get informed and it would be a lot easier for everybody else. Also, feel free to contact me on Discord and all that stuff. So yeah, that's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I see you in the next one.